Finding people who share your beliefs has never been easier. But in some cases, that connection slowly turns into control. These are communities that didn't just influence people. They took over their lives. Swallowed by the pipeline. On February 25, 2022, 5 commercial divers, Christopher Boudram, Kazim Ali Jr., Yusuf Henry, Rishi Nagasar, and Faisal Kurban, were sent into a submerged oil pipeline near Berth 6, Trinidad and Tobago. The job was supposed to be routine maintenance, but the pipeline, owned by Pariah Fuel Trading Company, had been secretly drained weeks earlier. When the team removed a safety plug, a violent pressure difference turned the pipe into a vacuum. All 5 men were sucked inside and dragged over 200 meters through a 76-centimeter wide pipeline. Injured and trapped in total darkness, they formed a human chain to survive. Boudram managed to escape and told rescuers the others were still alive. But despite that, rescue efforts were delayed and ultimately stopped. The remaining 4 divers died inside the pipe, with reports suggesting at least one survived up to 39 hours before suffocating. The scary tape. On January 8, 2005, a man named Martin opened his mailbox expecting nothing unusual, but inside was a plain, unmarked VHS tape. No sender, no note, just a recording. When he played it, what he saw immediately unsettled him. The video showed a man calmly sitting in a room, methodically laying out weapons, a Glock 23 pistol, a military knife, duct tape, even a power drill wrapped in padding to muffle the sound.
I'm not trained in torture methods, which is what I'm gonna have to make do. I got my drill here. The reason why it's got this padding on it is just to try to silence it a bit, because I'm in an apartment. I got gags, socks, got lots of duct tape.
The man then began explaining, step by step, how he planned to carry out violent acts. But the moment that turned fear into panic came seconds later. Martin recognized the face. It was Ricky Rodriguez, someone he personally knew. Rodriguez wasn't just anyone either. Born David Moses Zerbi in Tenerife, Spain, he had grown up inside the infamous cult Children of God, led by David Berg. In that tape, he wasn't rambling. He was documenting a calculated plan for revenge against the people who had controlled his life since childhood. What Martin had just watched wasn't fiction. It was a real confession, recorded before everything unfolded. The cult that secretly recruited inside other churches. In South Korea, a religious group known as Shincheonji Church of Jesus built its following using a recruitment system that operated largely in secret. Instead of openly inviting people to join, members were trained to infiltrate existing Christian communities and present themselves as ordinary believers. The group was founded in 1984 by Lee Man-hee, who claimed he had a unique role in a coming apocalypse that would wipe out most of humanity, teaching that only his followers would be among the chosen to survive. Rather than promoting these beliefs publicly, Shincheonji developed a structured, concealed recruitment process. Members would integrate into churches, attend services, and build close relationships over time, presenting themselves as trustworthy and committed, while quietly identifying individuals who seemed open or emotionally receptive. Once trust was established, those individuals were invited to private Bible study sessions, framed as exclusive opportunities for deeper understanding. Inside these sessions, information was tightly controlled. The group's identity was not revealed at first, and participants were instructed not to discuss the teachings with outsiders, limiting external influence or criticism.
사람마다 문제점이 있잖아요. 취업 문제라든지 특히 요즘같이 경쟁이 심한 사회에서 인간성이 소외당하고 외롭고 우울증이 있고 이런 부분을 특히나 신천지 같은 집단은 아주 잘 공략합니다. 사람들 말이 이래요. 내 영혼의 친구 같은 사람들이었다.
Lessons were introduced gradually, each stage reinforcing the previous one, making it increasingly difficult for participants to question the overall framework without undermining what they had already accepted. Over time, recruits were told that mainstream churches were fundamentally wrong and that only a small, select group possessed the truth. As involvement deepened, many were encouraged to distance themselves from their original communities, and sometimes even from friends or family who did not share the belief system, further increasing dependence on the group. Eventually, participants were told the teachings came from Shincheonji, and that Lee Man-hee was central to their salvation.
이 계시록 시대에 창조될 12지파 14만 4천 명이라고 기록되어 있습니다.
By that point, many had already invested significant time, trust, and identity into the group, making it psychologically difficult to leave. The transition from outsider to committed member often happened gradually, without a clear moment when individuals fully recognized the nature of the organization. For years, Shincheonji operated largely out of public view. In 2020, it gained international attention during the COVID-19 pandemic, when a large number of cases in South Korea were linked to its gatherings. Investigations exposed aspects of its recruitment methods and internal structure. But despite this, the group has continued to operate, with reports suggesting similar strategies are still being used today. Love has won. It started with a woman named Amy Carlson, a former McDonald's manager who, around 2006, began claiming she had a divine mission to save humanity. Over time, she built an online following that would become known as Love Has Won, a group that believed she wasn't just spiritual, but literally God in human form.
Where the upset comes from me is when, as I serve love every day and I am in love in action every moment.
According to her followers, she was billions of years old, had lived hundreds of past lives as figures like Jesus, Cleopatra, and Joan of Arc, and was guiding humanity into a higher dimension. The group didn't hide, they streamed everything. Daily live streams showed followers calling her Mother God, taking orders from her, and defending her every word. But behind that constant online presence, former members described something very different. People were expected to give up their money, their independence, and often their families to join the mission. Some followers reportedly handed over their belongings and income, believing it was part of their spiritual role. Others described strict routines, limited sleep, and constant pressure to stay in alignment. One of the most disturbing parts was how far the belief went. Followers claimed Amy could perform spiritual surgeries, healing serious illnesses remotely. Some genuinely believed they were being cured, while others later said money was exchanged for these sessions. In one case, a man left his family and job to join the group, only to be found days later disoriented and wandering alone after being separated from them during what they described as a mission. Inside the group, behavior could become extreme. Live streams showed moments where members were verbally attacked, pressured, or forced to justify themselves in front of others. Former followers described environments where questioning leadership wasn't allowed and where personal identity slowly disappeared into the group's belief system. Even basic decisions, like relationships, sleep, or daily routines, were influenced by the group's structure. And then there was Amy herself. Over time, her health visibly declined, yet followers insisted it was part of a spiritual transformation. She claimed she was absorbing the pain of humanity, even as her condition worsened. In 2021, she died, but the story didn't end there. When authorities eventually discovered her body, it had been kept by followers in a home, decorated and preserved as if she were still spiritually present. What makes Love Has Won especially disturbing isn't just what they believed, it's how openly it all happened. The live streams, the claims, the control, it was all visible, happening in real time, watched by thousands of people online. Killed by the elevator system. On February 13, 1907, inside a warehouse on 2nd Street, San Francisco, a 32-year-old electrical worker named Ernest was working inside an elevator shaft. Above him, his assistant J.G. Huffy unknowingly activated the system. As the elevator cab moved upward, the counterweight dropped at full speed. Ernest had no warning. The counterweight struck him instantly, killing him on impact. Investigators later confirmed it wasn't a malfunction. It was a communication failure, proving how even perfectly working machines can become deadly when one person doesn't know where another is. The 911 call that didn't add up. On July 15, 2008, in Orlando, Florida, Cindy Anthony made a frantic 911 call reporting that her 2-year-old granddaughter, Kaylee Anthony, had been missing for 31 days, a detail that immediately shocked investigators. During the call, Cindy also mentioned a strong smell of decomposition coming from her daughter, Casey Anthony's car, which would later become a key piece of evidence. Casey briefly spoke on the call herself, offering vague and inconsistent explanations about a nanny who had supposedly kidnapped Kaylee, a person who was later proven not to exist. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered multiple lies in Casey's statements.
Didn't you call 31 days ago? I've been looking for her and have gone through other resources to try to find her, which was stupid.
Including false claims about her workplace and the people she had been with. Investigators later determined that there was no credible evidence Kaylee had been alive during those 31 days. Prosecutors argued that Casey delayed reporting her daughter missing to cover up what had happened, while the defense claimed Kaylee had accidentally drowned in the family pool and that Casey, fearing the consequences, concealed it instead of calling for help. In 2011, after one of the most high-profile trials in the United States, Casey Anthony was found not guilty of murder, manslaughter, and child abuse, but she was convicted on 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. She was sentenced to time served and released shortly after, leaving the case surrounded by controversy, unanswered questions, and ongoing public debate about what truly happened during those 31 days. The cult that targets lonely travelers. A Chinese television crew conducted an undercover investigation in South Korea in 2024 to test a disturbing claim that solo travelers were being targeted by cult recruiters on the street. Within just 2 hours of walking through Seoul, one of the hosts, Xiaoa, was approached by a friendly woman offering to talk about Korean culture. What seemed like a harmless conversation quickly escalated as she was led into a building where members of a group known as Daesun Jinriho began performing rituals and asking deeply personal questions: her birth date, her family's names, even her financial situation. They explained that her suffering, and even her ancestors' suffering, was tied to spiritual imbalance, and that donating money could help resolve it. Another undercover agent, W. Jong, experienced similar pressure, with members insisting that delays in donations would cause prolonged suffering for his ancestors in the afterlife. At one point, they even followed him to a bank and later to the airport, urging him to withdraw more money before leaving the country. Despite the manipulation, what unsettled investigators most was how kind and genuine the recruiters appeared. So much so that Xiaoa later admitted she almost felt guilty leaving them behind. Because sometimes, the most dangerous control doesn't come from fear. It comes from feeling understood. The Zizians. In the mid-2000s, online spaces like Less Wrong were filled with programmers and philosophers trying to answer one question: how to prevent artificial intelligence from destroying humanity. They spoke in logic, probabilities, and systems, treating the human mind like something that could be optimized. For most, it stayed theoretical. But for one user, it didn't. Her name was Jack Lasota, later known online as Ziz, a programmer from Alaska who became deeply immersed in these communities after struggling to find stability in California's Bay Area. At first, her ideas were dismissed as extreme, but over time they evolved into something far more dangerous. Ziz began arguing that human identity could be broken apart and rebuilt, that emotions were flaws, and that morality itself was a system that needed to be overwritten. Followers were pushed to question everything: who they were, what they felt, and even whether right and wrong actually existed. Techniques like isolation and sleep deprivation reportedly emerged, slowly eroding resistance and reinforcing belief. A small, tight-knit group called the Zizians formed around her, cutting ties with the outside world and creating environments where their ideas couldn't be challenged. Over time, the line between theory and reality disappeared. They began to believe that if reality was just one of many possible timelines, then extreme actions, even violence, could be justified if it led to a better outcome overall. And by the early 2020s, that belief started showing up in the real world. In Vallejo, California, an elderly landlord named Curtis Lind was lured to his own property and suddenly attacked by members of the group. Stabbed dozens of times, a sword driven straight through his chest, losing an eye in the process. He survived, barely, managing to fire back and kill one attacker. Just weeks later, in a quiet suburb of Pennsylvania, Richard and Rita Zajko were found shot to death in their home, both killed with a firearm in what didn't appear to be a random attack. Their daughter, a highly educated researcher with ties to the group, quickly became a person of interest. Around the same time, writings linked to the Zizians surfaced, describing murder not as a crime, but as something that could be justified if it served a greater outcome. Then, in January 2025, the violence escalated again. In Vermont, a routine traffic stop turned into a shootout when suspected members opened fire on Border Patrol agents, killing Agent David Mayland within minutes. Days earlier, on the opposite side of the country, another member had tracked down Curtis Lind, the same landlord who had survived the earlier attack, and this time stabbed him to death outside his home. What makes the Zizians especially disturbing is how it all connects. Educated individuals, acting with intent, tied together by a belief system that treats reality as flexible and human life as something that could be justified away. Several members have since been arrested while others disappeared, and the full extent of the network remains unclear. The Zizians weren't just an internet cult. They were a group that started online and then brought those beliefs into the real world. Suffocated below 600 feet. At 5:15 a.m. on February 17, 1969, during a U.S. Navy experiment near San Clemente Island, California, aquanaut Barry Cannon began convulsing inside an underwater habitat located 610 feet below the surface. Fellow diver Bob Barth tried to force a breathing mouthpiece into his mouth, but Cannon was already suffocating. The investigation later revealed his rebreather was missing a critical chemical, beryllium, which removes carbon dioxide. Without it, he slowly suffocated on his own breath. Even more disturbing, officials later suspected possible sabotage, as someone may have tampered with life support systems. No one was ever charged. The final transmission. In January 2007, 38-year-old Australian adventurer Andrew McCauley set out from Tasmania with a goal no one had ever achieved: kayak solo, non-stop, across the Tasman Sea to New Zealand. That's over 1,600 kilometers of open ocean, known for violent storms and massive waves. McCauley documented everything on camera, including the brutal conditions he endured: 10 to 12 hours of paddling per day, complete isolation, and a storm on February 7th that flipped his kayak repeatedly in 40-knot winds. But his custom-built kayak, named Casper, kept him alive. By February 8th, he could finally see land, the South Island of New Zealand. He sent a message to his wife, Vicky, telling her he'd arrive soon. He was just 120 kilometers away. The next day, February 9th, something went wrong. His camera battery had died, so there's no footage of what happened next. Investigators later found damage to the kayak's capsule system, likely caused by the storm, which may have prevented it from self-righting after another flip. Despite being hours from safety, Andrew McCauley disappeared without a trace. His kayak was found, but he never was. The cult that branded its members. It looked like a high-end self-improvement program, expensive courses, success coaching, and promises of becoming the best version of yourself. But inside NXIVM, led by Keith Raniere, a hidden system was quietly taking shape.
Give us some basic idea of what you learned about this organization and its leader as well.
Well, NXIVM is a group of mostly affluent women, some actresses living in a conventional suburb outside of Albany, just looking like you and me, going to the gym, driving their BMWs, but they believe that they're on a path to enlightenment. And for some of them, enlightenment involved having sex with the leader, Keith Raniere.
Selected women were pulled into a secret group where they were told growth required absolute commitment. It started with handing over collateral, explicit photos, recorded confessions, even written statements designed to destroy their own reputation if exposed. Once inside, their lives became controlled in ways that didn't feel optional anymore. Members had to respond to commands at any time, day or night. Hesitation led to punishment. Physical exercises, cold exposure, or other tasks meant to enforce obedience. Some were pushed to cut off relationships, told their families were holding them back. Others were placed on extreme diets, sometimes limited to around 500 calories a day. Some of the women were even forced into sexual relationships with Raniere. Then came the moment framed as loyalty. Women were taken into a room, told to stay still, and branded with a heated cauterizing tool. The process could last up to 30 minutes. They were instructed to repeat phrases like, "Feel the pain, feel the love," and told it represented empowerment. In reality, the mark was a hidden design containing Raniere's initials. By that point, many were already trapped, not just psychologically, but through the constant threat of their collateral being released. Some were pressured into acts they never would have agreed to at the start, all under the belief that it was necessary for their growth. It only came to light when former members began to speak out. What followed exposed the full scale of what had been happening behind closed doors. Raniere was later arrested and convicted on multiple charges, including sex trafficking, and sentenced to 120 years in prison. The 764 cult. Unlike traditional cults, this one doesn't begin with a single leader or a fixed location. It exists as a decentralized network spread across the internet, often referred to as 764, and its subgroups. It traces back to 2021, when a 15-year-old from Texas named Bradley Cadenhead created one of the first groups after being exposed to earlier extremist chat communities. What started as a small online space quickly evolved into something far more structured, built around control, shock value, and status through increasingly extreme behavior. Even after Cadenhead was arrested and sentenced, the network didn't disappear. It spread across platforms like Discord, Telegram, and online games, turning into a global system that continues to adapt. Its members don't recruit in obvious ways. Instead, they target vulnerable users, sometimes as young as 8 years old, on platforms that appear completely normal. They pose as peers, build trust over time, and slowly create emotional dependency. Once that trust is established, the dynamic shifts. Private interactions are used to gain leverage, and control becomes the goal. What follows goes far beyond typical online manipulation. Victims are pushed into increasingly harmful situations, creating a cycle where leaving becomes extremely difficult. In documented cases, individuals were pressured into actions meant to prove loyalty, with that material then used to maintain control. Some were even pressured to involve others, turning victims into recruiters and allowing the network to grow. One example is a teenage girl named Penelope, who became deeply involved in these groups and was gradually influenced into increasingly dangerous behavior over time, eventually leading to a fatal outcome. At the same time, the network began extending into real-world violence. In one widely reported case, a teenage member in Romania attacked and killed an elderly woman while recording the act, reportedly to gain recognition within the group. Other cases across countries like the UK, Sweden, and the United States have involved planned attacks and violent incidents carried out to prove status. Investigations have linked the network to hundreds of ongoing cases, spanning multiple countries and jurisdictions. What makes this group especially disturbing is its structure. It doesn't rely on a single leader, and it doesn't depend on a fixed location. It spreads through anonymity, imitation, and escalation, meaning it can rebuild itself almost immediately after being shut down. Because in the end, this isn't just an internet cult. It's a system designed to operate in plain sight, using access, anonymity, and control to keep going. The explosion that flooded a city. On January 29, 2024, inside a PepsiCo factory in Santa Anita, Lima, Peru, a wastewater tank suddenly exploded. The blast unleashed a massive wave of contaminated water that tore through the factory walls and flooded surrounding streets. Cars were pushed aside, trees snapped, and residents ran for their lives as the surge spread through the neighborhood. 3 people were killed, and several others were injured. One victim, Wilmer Martinez, survived with a broken leg and later claimed he received no compensation. Investigators believe pressure buildup inside the tank caused the explosion, though some reports suggested possible negligence. A killer who didn't exist. In April 2007, in the German city of Heilbronn, a police officer named Michel Kiesewetter was sitting in her patrol car with her partner when someone approached from behind and opened fire, killing her and seriously injuring her colleague with a shot through the head. At the scene, investigators recovered a crucial piece of evidence, DNA from the attacker, something that should have led directly to a suspect, but instead, it led to something far more disturbing. That same DNA started appearing in completely unrelated crimes across Europe, from burglaries in Austria to violent robberies in France, and even older homicide cases dating back to 1993. This created the profile of a mysterious female serial offender dubbed the Phantom of Heilbronn, a woman who seemed to move across countries without ever being seen, leaving behind no witnesses, no footage, just the same genetic trace. And for years, hundreds of investigators chased this invisible suspect, linking over 40 crimes and multiple murders to the same person. Until 2009, when everything collapsed. After a routine arrest, police found the same DNA on a suspect who clearly wasn't connected to the case, forcing them to re-examine the evidence. And the truth turned out to be almost unbelievable. The DNA didn't belong to a killer at all, but to a factory worker who had unknowingly contaminated cotton swabs used in evidence kits during packaging. This meant that every single match had been a mistake, and for years, law enforcement across Europe had been hunting a serial killer who never existed, while the real perpetrators in those cases remained free. The sea took 33 men. In December 2015, during a violent storm in the Caspian Sea, a gas pipeline exploded at an offshore platform near Neft Dashlari, Azerbaijan. Hurricane-force winds, reaching 145 kilometers per hour, pounded the structure for nearly 27 hours. As fire spread across the platform, workers were forced to evacuate into lifeboats. But one of the cables snapped, slamming a lifeboat into the rig and throwing 33 workers into the freezing sea. Most were never recovered. That same night, another structure was destroyed when a cabin was ripped away by waves, killing 3 more workers. Despite the disaster, the facility still operates today. The family that walked away. On October 8, 2009, Bobby Jameson, his wife Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter Madison drove into the Sans Bois Mountains near Red Oak, Oklahoma, looking to buy land. Days later, their white pickup truck was found abandoned in Latimer County. Inside were their wallets, phones, coats, and $32,000 in cash left untouched. Their dog, Maisie, was still inside, barely alive after being trapped for over a week. But the most disturbing detail came from their home security footage. The video showed Bobby and Sherilyn loading the truck before leaving, but something felt off. They moved back and forth over 20 times, silently, with no visible communication, almost like they were in a trance. There was one more clue, a photo on Sherilyn's phone. It showed Madison standing alone on a rocky hillside, wearing a pink shirt. Her expression has been debated ever since. Some say she looks normal, others think she looks tense, almost scared. 4 years later, in November 2013, hunters discovered their skeletal remains just 3 miles from where the truck was found. Due to decomposition, no official cause of death could be determined. Theories ranged from harming themselves to murder or even cartel involvement. But nothing was ever proven. Even with footage, evidence, and a timeline, what actually happened to the Jameson family remains unknown. The cult that drank poison together. It began in the 1950s when Jim Jones, a charismatic preacher in the United States, built a movement called the People's Temple by promoting racial equality, social justice, and a utopian community where everyone would be cared for. An image that attracted thousands of devoted followers. But behind the scenes, Jones was already tightening control. He forced members to publicly confess their deepest secrets, used humiliation and fear to maintain authority, and gradually convinced them he had divine powers, including the ability to heal, read minds, and predict the future. As his paranoia intensified in the 1970s, he became convinced that the government and outsiders were plotting against him. and in 1977, he relocated over 900 followers to a remote jungle settlement in Guyana called Jonestown, presenting it as a safe haven. Once there, members found themselves trapped in an isolated compound surrounded by armed guards, cut off from the outside world, and forced to work long hours in harsh conditions with limited food and sleep, while Jones broadcast hours-long speeches over loudspeakers day and night, reinforcing the idea that escape was impossible and that death was preferable to betrayal. He also staged repeated white knight drills, where members were told to drink what they believed was poison as a loyalty test, conditioning them to accept death on command. Then, on November 18, 1978, after U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan visited Jonestown to investigate reports of abuse and was assassinated by temple members while trying to leave, Jones ordered the final act. He instructed his followers to gather and drink a mixture laced with cyanide, sedatives, and flavoring, resulting in the deaths of over 900 people, including more than 300 children. Some went willingly, while others were forced or injected against their will.
How very much I've loved you. How very much I've tried my best to give you the good life. But in spite of all of that I've tried, a handful of our people, with their lies, have made our life impossible. There's no way to detach ourselves from what's happened today.
It remains one of the largest mass deaths in modern history, not caused by war or disaster, but by psychological control so absolute that many believed they had no choice left at all. Twin Flames Universe. It started as something almost harmless, an online coaching program built around one idea. Somewhere in the world, there is one person who is your perfect match, your twin flame, and if you follow the right steps, you will find them. That idea was turned into a business by Jeff and Shalia Devine, who built an online movement promising both love and purpose. But according to former members, what developed behind the scenes was far more controlling. One example is Angie, a Canadian administrative worker who joined during a vulnerable period. At first, she described feeling supported and accepted, but over time she says she was encouraged to pursue a man who repeatedly rejected her, even showing up at his home because she had been told he was her twin flame. When he threatened legal action, the guidance wasn't to stop. It was to push through and break the block. Another former member, Victoria, described a similar shift. What began as personal development slowly turned into a system where every doubt, rejection, or negative emotion was treated as her own failure, something that required more coaching, more sessions, and deeper involvement to fix. Over time, she became both financially and emotionally dependent on the group, while also being expected to help bring in new members. In some cases, the influence went even further. Former members reported being told that their identity itself was incorrect, that every person is either fully masculine or fully feminine, and that their true role might not match who they believed they were. Some individuals say they were pushed to change their name, appearance, and lifestyle to align with what the group defined as their correct identity. The system reinforced itself in a way that made it difficult to leave. If results didn't come, the explanation was never the method, it was the individual. Members were encouraged to continue investing in courses and coaching, sometimes spending tens of thousands of dollars, while being told they were close to a breakthrough. Questioning the structure wasn't really an option. Former followers described being told that doubting the leadership was equivalent to doubting something higher. Over time, the teachings escalated further, with leaders presenting themselves as divine figures and the ultimate authority within the system. Authorities eventually took notice, launching investigations into allegations of coercion, financial exploitation, and manipulation. Reports described members becoming isolated from family, pressured into unpaid labor, and making major life decisions under the group's influence. The rocket that triggered hell. On July 29, 1967, aboard the aircraft carrier USS Forrestal in the Gulf of Tonkin, off North Vietnam, more than 40 aircraft were lined up on the flight deck preparing for a strike mission when, at 10:53 a.m., a Zuni rocket accidentally fired from an F-4 Phantom, piloted by Lieutenant Commander Jim Bangert. The rocket shot across the deck and struck an A-4 Skyhawk, piloted by Lieutenant Commander Fred White, rupturing its fuel tank and releasing hundreds of gallons of jet fuel that quickly ignited and spread to nearby aircraft, including one flown by John McCain. And within seconds, bombs began to fall from the damaged jet as firefighters rushed in. But less than a minute after the fire started, one of the old 1,000-pound bombs exploded, killing many of the first responders instantly, followed by multiple additional explosions that tore through the deck, fueled by tens of thousands of gallons of burning fuel, sending fire and debris below into crew quarters where many sailors were sleeping. While the fire on deck was contained within an hour, the fires below burned for hours, and by the end of the disaster, 134 sailors and airmen were dead, 161 were injured, and dozens of aircraft were destroyed. Investigators later concluded the tragedy was caused by a combination of faulty wiring, bypassed safety procedures, and unstable aging bombs that detonated far faster than expected. The interrogation that revealed Jodi Arias's lies. On June 4, 2008, in Mesa, Arizona, the body of Travis Alexander was discovered in his home after friends grew concerned when he missed an important event. He had been brutally killed, shot, stabbed dozens of times, and left in his shower, turning the case into an immediate priority for investigators. When detectives brought in his ex-girlfriend Jodi Arias for questioning, she initially appeared calm and cooperative, but her story quickly raised red flags. In her first interviews, Arias denied being in Arizona at all, insisting she hadn't seen Travis for weeks. But as detectives pressed further, cracks began to show. Forensic evidence placed her at the scene, and one of the most damning discoveries came from a damaged digital camera found in Travis's home. Investigators were able to recover deleted photos showing Arias and Alexander together on the day of the murder, smiling, relaxed, and seemingly normal, followed by a chilling sequence of images taken just moments before his death, including one that accidentally captured part of the attack itself. Confronted with this evidence, Arias's story shifted. She abandoned her original alibi and claimed that two masked intruders had broken into the home and killed Travis while sparing her life. But as detectives challenged her with inconsistencies and the lack of any supporting evidence, that version also collapsed. Eventually, she changed her story again, this time claiming she had acted in self-defense after Travis allegedly attacked her. Each new version directly contradicted the last, and the recorded interrogations became a striking example of how evolving stories under pressure can expose deception. What started as a complete denial unraveled step by step, as physical evidence forced Arias to keep rewriting her account. Jodi Arias was convicted of first-degree murder in 2013 for the killing of Travis Alexander. The jury found her guilty, but they could not reach a unanimous decision on the death penalty, even after a separate penalty phase retrial. As a result, in 2015 she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The cult that predicted the end of the world. In 1984, in a small apartment in Tokyo's Shibuya district, a man named Shoko Asahara began teaching yoga and meditation to a handful of students. At first, it seemed like just another spiritual class. But Asahara, born Chizuo Matsumoto, claimed he had reached a higher state of consciousness and alone understood the true nature of the world.
それで唱えられている方ですので、経典をベースに置く限り、朝原その地は文字通りの聖者であると。
As his following grew, so did his claims. By the late 1980s, he declared himself a divine figure who could cleanse sins, read minds, and even levitate. The group became known as Aum Shinrikyo, meaning Supreme Truth, and in 1989 it was officially recognized as a religious organization by the Japanese government, giving it protection and allowing it to expand rapidly. By the early 1990s, Aum had thousands of members, including doctors, engineers, and scientists. Many handed over their life savings, cut ties with family, and moved into isolated compounds where they underwent intense training. This included sleep deprivation, sensory isolation, drug use, and psychological conditioning, designed to break down their identity and rebuild it around Asahara's teachings. At the center of those teachings was one belief: the end of the world was coming. Asahara predicted an imminent global apocalypse, often a nuclear war, that would wipe out most of humanity, with only members surviving. As his paranoia grew, so did the group's actions. After a failed political campaign in 1990, Asahara became increasingly aggressive, convinced society was against him. Former members who tried to leave were reportedly punished or killed, and critics began disappearing. Behind the scenes, Aum was no longer just a religious movement. It was developing chemical and biological weapons using the expertise of its own members. They ran secret labs, stockpiled toxic substances, and prepared for what they believed was the coming apocalypse. Then, on March 20th, 1995, that preparation turned into action. During rush hour, Aum members released sarin gas on multiple trains in the Tokyo subway system. The attack killed 13 people and injured over 5,000, many suffering permanent damage. It remains one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in Japan's history. In the aftermath, authorities raided Aum facilities and arrested Asahara, along with several high-ranking members. In 2018, after years of trials, he was executed. But the scale of what the group built, and how close they came to something even worse, left a lasting mark on the country. The Mine Death Trap. On May 10, 1995, in the Val Reefs mine, Orkney, South Africa, over 100 miners were riding a double-deck elevator during a shift change. At the same time, a 2,400-pound train was accidentally sent into the same shaft. The train collided with the elevator, snapping its support cable. Both the train and elevator plunged nearly 1,600 feet to the bottom. The impact crushed the elevator into what investigators described as a tin box, killing almost everyone instantly. The disaster remains one of the deadliest mining accidents in South African history. She was set up. On July 30th, 2009, in Boynton Beach, Florida, a woman named Dalia DiPolito met with a man she believed was arranging a hit on her husband, Michael DiPolito. What she didn't know was that the entire operation was a police setup. The man she was speaking to was wired, and the hitman she later met, an undercover officer named Witty Jean, had cameras recording everything. Sitting inside a red convertible, Dalia calmly discussed payment, timing, and how she wanted her husband killed. There was no hesitation. When asked if she was certain, she gave a chilling response. "I'm positive. Like 5,000% sure." That sentence would later become one of the most infamous moments in recorded police footage. Just days later, she was arrested. What makes this case so disturbing isn't just the crime, it's how casually it was planned, on camera, in broad daylight. The cult that turned paradise into a prison. It began as a promise of safety. In 2002, a woman named Shin Ok-ju founded a small religious group in South Korea called Grace Road Church. At first, her message sounded familiar: faith, salvation, and protection from a world she claimed was becoming increasingly corrupt. But over time, her teachings took a darker turn. Shin began warning her followers that a global catastrophe was coming, specifically a nuclear apocalypse that would destroy most of humanity. According to her, only one place on Earth would remain safe: a remote island nation in the Pacific called Fiji. At first, many dismissed her claims, but a small group believed her completely. By the early 2000s, that group had grown into hundreds of followers, many of whom were deeply committed. Shin convinced them that time was running out, and if they wanted to survive, they needed to leave everything behind. She instructed them to sell their homes, quit their jobs, and hand over their money to the church. In return, they were promised safety, purpose, and a place in the new world that would follow the apocalypse. In 2014, hundreds of members relocated to Fiji, believing they were escaping the end of the world. But when they arrived, the reality was very different. Their passports were taken. Their phones and personal belongings were confiscated. Instead of a sanctuary, they found themselves trapped. Members were assigned to work in businesses owned by the group: farms, construction sites, restaurants, often working up to 6 days a week with little rest and no pay. Many slept only a few hours per night, becoming physically and mentally exhausted. But the labor wasn't the worst part. Shin enforced strict discipline through violent training sessions, which she claimed were necessary to purify her followers' souls. Members were beaten, sometimes severely, while being told it was for their own good. Some suffered long-term injuries, and in at least one case, a member reportedly died after one of these punishment sessions. Those who questioned her authority were humiliated or punished even more harshly. Escape was nearly impossible. Without passports or access to communication, members were isolated from the outside world. Some tried to flee, but many were caught or too afraid to even try. Meanwhile, Shin continued to expand her business operations in Fiji, building influence and maintaining control over her followers. It wasn't until 2018 that the situation began to unravel. After reports surfaced, South Korean authorities launched an investigation. Shin Ok-ju was arrested and later convicted of multiple charges, including assault and unlawful confinement. She was sentenced to prison, and some members were finally able to return home. But for many, the damage had already been done. The silo that swallowed him alive. On May 30th, 2011, 18-year-old Thomas Ozier was working inside a grain silo at Pine Grove Farm in Michigan, USA. While scraping corn stuck to the walls, the grain beneath him suddenly gave way. In seconds, he was pulled under like quicksand. A co-worker, Patrick Pickfett, saw his tool fall, then his phone, then his leg disappearing beneath the grain. Despite efforts from over 35 emergency responders, they couldn't pull him out in time. It took 4 hours just to recover his body. Grain entrapment is one of the most dangerous and silent ways to die in agriculture. The timeline that exposed Scott Peterson. On December 24, 2002, in Modesto, California, Scott Peterson told police he had spent the morning fishing alone at the Berkeley Marina, hours after his pregnant wife, Lacey Peterson, was reported missing from their home. As investigators began reconstructing his movements using receipts, phone records, and marina surveillance, they confirmed he had indeed been there. But what stood out to detectives, and later became one of the most unsettling details, was his behavior during the early stages of the investigation, especially during media appearances and interviews where he was supposedly helping the search for his missing wife. At one point, while speaking publicly, his phone rang, and he ignored it, showing no urgency or concern, despite claiming to be desperate to find Lacey. A reaction that investigators found deeply inconsistent with someone who believed their wife might still be alive. And when combined with other details, like purchasing a fishing license for that exact day weeks in advance and giving conflicting statements about his plans, the timeline he had carefully constructed began to fall apart. Especially after Lacey's body and that of their unborn son were found along the San Francisco Bay shoreline in April 2003, near where he said he had been fishing, turning his own alibi into the very evidence that tied him to the crime. The cult that trapped people on an island. In the early 2000s, a religious group began recruiting followers in South Korea with a message about salvation, discipline, and preparing for a better future. Like many others, it didn't seem unusual at first, just another strict belief system offering meaning to people who were searching for direction. But over time, members were encouraged to take a much bigger step, leave their lives behind, and relocate to Jeju Island. Jeju, often called the Hawaii of South Korea, is known for its beauty, volcanic landscapes, quiet villages, and isolation from the mainland. And that isolation was exactly what made it ideal. Once followers arrived, the environment began to change. Their movements were restricted. Their communication with the outside world became limited, and daily life was tightly controlled by the group's leadership. Members were assigned roles and expected to work long hours, often under strict supervision. Sleep was limited, schedules were rigid, and questioning authority wasn't tolerated. What made it more disturbing was how quickly normal life disappeared. People who once had jobs, families, and independence found themselves completely dependent on the group for everything: food, shelter, and even permission to leave. Some former members later described how the group maintained control through a mix of discipline and fear. Punishments could be harsh, and leaving wasn't as simple as walking away. The isolation of the island made it difficult to escape unnoticed, and many felt psychologically trapped long before they were physically able to leave. As reports began to surface, authorities started investigating the situation. Testimonies from former members revealed patterns of control, forced labor, and coercion. The image of a peaceful religious retreat quickly gave way to something much darker, a system designed to isolate and dominate the people inside it. The signal from a sunken ship. On October 25, 1983, the drilling ship Glomar Java Sea capsized during Typhoon Lex near Hainan Island, China, taking 81 crew members with it. The disaster should have ended there, but it didn't. 2 days later, on October 27th, a cargo ship picked up a distress signal on 500 kilohertz. The message contained the ship's exact call sign, WFDL, and coordinates 70 nautical miles away from where it sank. That meant one thing: someone might still be alive. Over the next 48 hours, aircraft reported lights in the water, flares, and movement, clear signs of survivors. A lifeboat was even spotted, but no rescue was ever completed. Officially, there were no survivors. Unofficially, many believe people were alive out there, calling for help that never came. The family that disappeared mid-meal. On February 4, 2010, Joseph McStay, his wife Summer, and their 2 young sons, Gianni and Joseph Jr., vanished from their home in Fallbrook, California. When investigators entered the house, they found a strange scene: bowls of popcorn left out, eggs still on the counter, and their dogs abandoned outside without food or water. It looked like the family had suddenly walked out mid-meal. Days later, their white Isuzu Trooper was found abandoned near the U.S.-Mexico border. Surveillance footage showed a family crossing into Mexico that night, but the images were too blurry to confirm identities. For years, the case remained a mystery. Then, in 2013, their remains were discovered in shallow graves in the Mojave Desert. The cause of death: blunt force trauma. Investigators eventually arrested Joseph's business partner, Charles Chase Merritt, after uncovering financial fraud and phone data placing him near the burial site. In 2019, he was found guilty. But even with a conviction, one question lingers: what really happened in those final moments before the family disappeared? The TikTok cult. This one doesn't start in isolation. It starts in the spotlight. In the early 2020s, a group of young dancers began going viral on TikTok, gaining millions of followers and landing major opportunities. Many were connected to a talent management company called 7M Films, founded in 2021 by Robert Shin, who also leads Shekinah Church in Los Angeles. On the surface, it looked like a fast track to success: brand deals, collaborations, luxury filming locations. But according to former members, families, and lawsuits, the company and the church were closely linked, and what started as career growth gradually became something more controlling. Dancers were recruited through creator houses and management deals, then gradually introduced to a system where professional success, finances, and personal life became increasingly connected. Former members say the line between the talent agency and the church was often unclear, with the same leadership, overlapping environments, and expectations tied to both. Some reports claim members gave up large portions of their income, sometimes as much as 70 to 80%, through a combination of management fees and religious donations, tying their finances closely to the organization. One of the most well-known cases involved Miranda Derrick, who had built a large following with her sister. In 2021, shortly after joining 7M, her family says her behavior changed rapidly. She stopped communicating, cut off contact, missed her grandfather's funeral after canceling just before her flight, and later married another 7M member in a private ceremony her family says they weren't informed about. When they visited her, they described her as withdrawn and unlike herself. Similar stories began to surface. Families reported loved ones distancing themselves, becoming deeply involved in the group, and restructuring their lives around it. Former members alleged that individuals were encouraged to cut ties with outsiders, while families described sudden personality shifts, changes in behavior, appearance, and communication that seemed to happen within weeks. Multiple dancers within the group also entered relationships or marriages with other members, raising further concerns about how personal decisions were being influenced. By 2022, the situation went public when Miranda's family posted a video saying they believed she was being controlled. The video went viral, more families came forward with nearly identical experiences, and civil lawsuits followed, with allegations including manipulation, isolation, and financial exploitation. In 2025, federal agents conducted a raid linked to the organization as part of a broader investigation into alleged crimes including financial misconduct and trafficking-related offenses, though reports at the time did not confirm criminal charges directly tied to that operation. At the same time, those involved have denied these accusations. Miranda Derrick has stated she is not part of a cult and that her decisions were personal, while 7M Films and Robert Shin maintain the company is simply a talent agency and not connected to the church in the way critics claim. The battery chain reaction. On October 21, 2024, in Shunde District, Foshan, Guangdong Province, China, workers noticed smoke rising from a stack of lithium-ion batteries inside a warehouse. Within moments, the batteries began to ignite one after another, triggering a violent chain reaction. Flames spread rapidly through the storage area, forcing workers to flee as explosions followed. One worker appeared to be caught close to the fire, but later footage confirmed he had escaped before the flames fully engulfed the space. The warehouse owner, Mr. Ju, reported significant financial losses, but no fatalities. The man in the suitcase. In February 2020, in Winter Park, Florida, Sarah Boone called 911 claiming it was a tragic accident. She told police she and her boyfriend, Jorge Torres Jr., had been drinking wine and playing hide-and-seek, and that he had climbed into a suitcase as part of the game, after which she said she went upstairs, fell asleep, and only discovered him unresponsive the next morning. She insisted she thought he could get out on his own and never intended to harm him. But when investigators examined her phone, they found videos recorded that same night showing a completely different reality.
Sarah. That's my name. Don't wear it up. Sarah, I can't breathe, babe. Seriously. Yeah, that's when you do when you choke me, Sarah.
Jorge was trapped inside the suitcase, panicking, struggling, and repeatedly begging for help, saying he couldn't breathe, while Sarah laughed, mocked him, and refused to unzip it. As the case moved forward, her behavior only added to the chaos. She went through multiple defense attorneys, reportedly firing several of them over disagreements about strategy and claims about her treatment, delaying the legal process and drawing even more attention to the case. It ultimately became one of the most chilling examples of how a single piece of footage can completely dismantle a story and reveal what really happened in someone's final moments. The night the factory exploded. On June 16, 2025, in Linli County, Hunan Province, China, a fireworks factory caught fire during a routine loading operation. What started as a small flame quickly spread to a storage area filled with high-powered fireworks. Within moments, the entire facility detonated in a chain reaction of explosions. The blasts were so powerful they shattered windows in nearby villages and lit up the sky like a war zone. 9 people were killed and dozens were injured. Investigations later revealed the factory had been cited multiple times for safety violations and illegal operations, warnings that had been ignored until it was too late. The cult that used love to take control. It started like a modern love story. In 2017, a couple named Jeff and Shalia Devine began promoting an online coaching program that promised something almost everyone wants: a guaranteed path to finding your twin flame, your perfect romantic partner.
A fun statistic for you. Generally, for the vast supermajority of people on the planet, if you just listen to our information and you genuinely do it, and you don't know your twin flame, it should take you a week to get into harmonious union. A really chill week.
Through YouTube videos, online courses, and private coaching sessions, they built a growing audience of people who felt lost in their relationships or desperate to find love. Their message was simple but powerful. Everyone has a twin flame, and if you follow their teachings, you will find them. At first, the advice sounded harmless. They encouraged self-reflection, emotional openness, and persistence in relationships. But over time, followers were told that if a relationship wasn't working, it wasn't because it was unhealthy. It was because they weren't trying hard enough. Breakups weren't accepted. Rejection wasn't real. According to Jeff and Shalia, if someone was truly your twin flame, you had to pursue them no matter what. This belief system quickly became dangerous. Members were encouraged to continue contacting people who had clearly cut off communication, convinced that persistence would eventually lead to love. Some were told to ignore restraining orders, believing they were just tests of their commitment. Others were pushed to reinterpret rejection as proof that the connection was real. Then came the most disturbing part. In some cases, when followers couldn't find their twin flame, they were told to look within their own community. Coaches began assigning partners, sometimes encouraging people to change their gender identity to better align with their supposed match. Members were told that their identity itself could be wrong, and that the group's teachings could fix it. Behind the scenes, the system was also highly profitable. Courses cost thousands of dollars, and many followers felt pressured to keep paying for more guidance, believing they were just one step away from achieving perfect love. Some spent years trapped in the cycle, losing money, relationships, and their sense of self. By the early 2020s, former members began speaking out, describing the group as controlling and manipulative. Investigations and documentaries brought more attention to the organization, exposing how deeply some people had been affected. The tank that turned into a bomb. On January 24, 2026, at a Pegasus fuel station in Kazakhstan, workers were performing routine operations around a fuel tanker. One worker stood on top of the tanker, while others moved nearby. Everything looked normal, until it wasn't. Without warning, a massive explosion erupted, engulfing the tanker in flames. The blast was sudden and violent, turning a routine workday into chaos in seconds. Investigators pointed to fuel vapor ignition, one of the most dangerous risks in fuel handling. In environments like this, even a single spark can turn an entire tanker into a bomb. Qanon. It began in 2017 on anonymous message boards, where a user calling themselves Q started posting cryptic, vague messages claiming to be a high-level government insider with access to classified information. These posts described a hidden world where a secret cabal of elites, politicians, celebrities, and billionaires controlled governments, media, and global events, allegedly engaging in child trafficking and other extreme crimes, while then President Donald Trump was secretly working to expose them in a coming event known as the Storm. None of these claims were supported by evidence, but QAnon didn't spread like a normal conspiracy. It spread like a game. Followers were encouraged to do their own research, decoding vague clues, interpreting symbols, and connecting unrelated events until the theory started to feel real. The more confusing and complex it became, the more convincing it seemed, creating the illusion of hidden knowledge that only insiders could understand. Millions of people were eventually drawn into this belief system, many becoming deeply consumed by it, spending hours each day online, following updates, watching interpretations, and reinforcing each other's beliefs in isolated communities. Over time, it began to reshape how they saw the world. News, science, and even personal relationships were reinterpreted through the lens of the conspiracy. Families were torn apart, with parents cutting off children, partners separating, and lifelong relationships collapsing as believers became convinced that those around them were either asleep or part of the problem. What made QAnon especially dangerous was its flexibility. It absorbed almost any conspiracy theory, from government cover-ups to aliens, making it adaptable to nearly anyone's fears or beliefs. And eventually, it didn't stay online. In January 2021, QAnon beliefs played a significant role in the storming of the US Capitol, where followers believed they were helping trigger the storm themselves. Beyond that, multiple real-world incidents, including kidnappings, armed standoffs, and murders, have been linked to individuals influenced by the movement, prompting authorities to classify it as a potential domestic terror threat. What makes QAnon so disturbing isn't just what it claims, it's how it pulls people in. It offers a sense of purpose, secret knowledge, and belonging, slowly replacing reality with a narrative where doubt becomes proof, and questioning the belief system only pushes people deeper into it. Trapped 240 feet underground. On July 24, 2002, in the Quee Creek Mine in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, 18 miners entered the mine for a routine shift, splitting into 2 groups of 9. But just before 9 p.m., one crew accidentally drilled into an abandoned mine filled with water, releasing an estimated 150 million gallons that rushed into the tunnels. One group managed to escape, but the other 9 were trapped 240 feet underground as the mine rapidly flooded, leaving them with rising water and limited air. Above ground, rescue crews worked through the night, using GPS to locate them and drilling a small hole that finally broke through around 3:15 a.m. on July 25th, prompting the trapped miners to respond with 9 taps, confirming they were still alive. But as hours passed, the water level continued rising to within 70 feet of them, and some miners began writing goodbye letters to their families, unsure if help would reach them in time. After days of drilling setbacks, including a broken drill bit, rescuers finally broke through with a larger shaft at 10:15 p.m. on July 27th, confirming all 9 were alive. And in the early hours of July 28th, one by one, the miners were pulled to the surface, with the final man emerging at 2:45 a.m., ending one of the most dramatic underground rescues in U.S. history. Unexpected family trip. On May 11, 2011, in Aurora, Illinois, 6-year-old Timothy Pitson was picked up early from school by his mother, Amy Fry Pitson, who told staff there was a family emergency. Over the next 3 days, surveillance footage captured what looked like a normal trip. They visited the Brookfield Zoo, a water park in Wisconsin Dells, and stayed in multiple hotels, with witnesses describing Timothy as happy and relaxed, completely unaware anything was wrong. But behind the scenes, Amy's behavior raised concern, as she repeatedly called family members sounding unusually cheerful while refusing to let Timothy speak on the phone. On May 14th, she checked into a motel in Rockford, Illinois, alone. The next day, she was found dead in her room after hurting herself, leaving behind a handwritten note claiming Timothy was safe, but adding a chilling line: "You will never find him." And when investigators searched her car, they found traces of Timothy's blood along with signs she had driven through remote areas, sparking a massive nationwide search involving police, volunteers, and media coverage. Yet despite years of investigation, surveillance footage, and countless leads, no one has ever been able to confirm where Timothy went or who he may have been left with, turning what began as a simple family trip into one of the most disturbing unsolved disappearances ever caught on camera. The steel roll that pinned him. On August 3, 2020, in Samut Prakan, Thailand, a warehouse worker was using an overhead crane to move several multi-ton steel rolls. As he worked close to one of the rolls on the ground, it suddenly tipped over. The massive cylinder crushed both of his legs, pinning him against the concrete, while thousands of kilograms of steel hovered dangerously above his head. Unable to move, he screamed for help. Co-workers rushed in and managed to move the suspended load before lifting the roll off him. He survived, but suffered 2 broken legs. The exact cause of the roll tipping was never confirmed. The molten metal blast. Inside a steel plant, a worker dropped a piece of scrap metal into an active induction furnace filled with molten material. What he didn't realize was that the scrap contained trapped moisture or gases. The moment it hit the molten surface, the liquid instantly vaporized, creating extreme pressure. Within seconds, the furnace erupted, sending a burst of white-hot molten metal outward across the platform. The explosion lit up the entire area, forcing workers to jump back as the material spread rapidly. Incidents like this happen when contaminated materials are introduced into extreme heat without proper preparation. exploded rocket. On October 24, 1960, at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, a rush test of the Soviet R-16 missile turned into the deadliest disaster in spaceflight history. When Marshal Mitrofan Nedelin, eager to meet a political deadline, ordered technicians to continue working on the rocket while it was fully fueled with highly toxic hypergolic propellants known as Devil's Venom, despite multiple technical failures and safety violations. Around 6:45 p.m., a misconfigured control system caused the missile to behave as if it were already in flight, triggering the second stage engines while still on the pad. In an instant, flames blasted downward into the first stage fuel tanks, creating a massive fireball that engulfed the launch site, where around 250 personnel were still present. Many of them caught in the explosion or trapped while trying to escape as burning fuel. Toxic gases and extreme heat spread across the area. Some victims were unable to flee after getting stuck in melting tar, and others were pinned against perimeter fences, while temperatures at the center of the fire reached around 3,000 degrees and the blaze burned for hours. Official death tolls remain unclear due to secrecy, but estimates range from 92 to nearly 200 people killed, including Nedelin himself, making it the single deadliest accident in the history of space exploration. A disaster later blamed on a combination of design flaws, extreme pressure to meet deadlines, and the decision to ignore critical safety protocols. The modern mystery school cult. It started as something that looked almost professional, a spiritual school offering courses in personal growth, energy healing, and ancient knowledge. In the late 1990s, a man named Gudni Gudnason, later known as Gudni Goodness, claimed he had a life-changing encounter with extraterrestrial beings who taught him hidden knowledge about the universe.
I was raised with beings that we normally call gods or angels, and these beings. That was the first 10 years of my life.
According to him, these beings gave him a mission to pass this knowledge on to humanity. Not long after, he founded what became known as the Modern Mystery School, presenting it as a place where people could unlock their full potential and protect the world from unseen forces. At first, the teachings sounded harmless: meditation, self-improvement, and spiritual awareness. But as students progressed, the lessons became more extreme. They were told that the world was under constant threat from dark entities crossing into our reality, and that only trained members of the school could stop them. To reach higher levels, students had to pay for more advanced courses, often costing thousands of dollars. Some members reportedly spent over $90,000 trying to reach the highest ranks. The deeper they went, the more intense the experience became. Advanced members were introduced to rituals and tests, including being buried alive as a way to prove their commitment and overcome fear. Those who passed were invited into an inner circle known as the Shadow Team, a group that believed they were actively fighting demonic forces around the world. Members were sent to locations affected by natural disasters, convinced they were performing rituals to stop supernatural threats. But the control didn't stop there. Former members later revealed that fear was used to keep people from leaving. They were told that if they walked away, they would become vulnerable to possession, illness, or even death. At the same time, they were encouraged to take on debt to continue their training, being told that money was just energy that needed to flow. In 2021, investigative journalist Mark Wilding exposed the group after interviewing former members and insiders. His report revealed a pattern of manipulation, financial exploitation, and psychological control. While the organization denied the accusations, many members left after the story gained attention. But the group didn't disappear. It still operates in dozens of countries today, continuing to offer expensive courses and recruit new members. The falling magnet load. Inside a crowded industrial workspace, a magnetic crane was lifting a heavy steel block above a narrow walkway used by workers. One employee walked directly underneath the suspended load as it moved overhead. Without warning, the magnet lost its grip. The steel block dropped instantly, smashing through the walkway and collapsing the structure beneath it. Nearby workers rushed toward the scene only after the area was secured. The incident showed how quickly a suspended load can become deadly, especially when people are standing directly below it. The gun they missed twice. On October 9, 2017, in Lubbock, Texas, 19-year-old Hollis Daniels was first stopped by Texas Tech police while driving his vehicle after being linked to a stolen handgun. But during this roadside interaction, officers performed a pat-down and failed to find the weapon because it had slipped down his pant leg due to loose clothing. With no immediate grounds to detain him further, he was released, only for officers to return hours later to his dorm for a welfare check after concerns were raised. They then discovered suspicious items including drug paraphernalia and a bullet hole, leading them to take Daniels into custody and transport him to the Texas Tech Police Department, where he was searched again, yet the gun was still missed for the same reason. Placed in a briefing room, surveillance footage later showed him sitting calmly for nearly 30 minutes, subtly adjusting his clothing and positioning, waiting for the right moment until officers removed his handcuffs. At that point, he retrieved the hidden firearm from his pants and shot Officer Floyd East Jr. at close range, killing him instantly before fleeing the building, only to be captured shortly after, turning a routine stop and follow-up welfare check into a fatal breakdown of procedure where one missed detail cost someone's life. A simple decision led to 167 deaths. On July 6, 1988, about 120 miles northeast of Scotland, the Piper Alpha oil rig, one of the largest and most productive rigs in the world, was operating with a crew of 226 men. That evening, at around 9:45 p.m., control room operator Jeff Mullins noticed alarms going off for a condensate pump. One pump was already offline for maintenance, and the second had just shut down. To avoid a full production shutdown, the decision was made to restart the first pump. But no one realized that during maintenance, its safety valve had been removed, leaving nothing to stop gas from escaping. When the pump was switched back on, gas began leaking into the rig. Just minutes later, a spark ignited it. A massive explosion tore through the platform, sending 700-degree flames across the structure. Fires spread rapidly, triggering more explosions as pipelines ruptured. Within hours, the rig was completely out of control. By midnight, the structure began to collapse and fall into the sea. Many men were still trapped on board. In total, 167 workers were killed, and only 61 survived, making it one of the deadliest offshore disasters in history. Lord's Resistance Army Cult. It began in the late 1980s, when Joseph Kony emerged in northern Uganda, claiming he was a spiritual medium chosen to communicate with unseen forces and lead his people according to divine commandments. But what he built was not just a rebel group. It was a highly controlled system built on fear, belief, and total obedience. Kony told his followers he could read minds, predict the future, and punish disobedience through supernatural means, creating an environment where questioning him felt impossible. Instead of relying on traditional recruitment, the Lord's Resistance Army took in thousands of children, some very young, and forced them into its ranks. The process was designed to break down their sense of identity and replace it with complete loyalty to the group, often by pushing them into situations that made returning to their previous lives feel impossible. Boys were trained to become fighters, while girls were assigned roles within the group under strict control, with many remaining in the system for years. Life inside the organization was defined by constant pressure, isolation, and fear of punishment, of being cast out, and of the belief that Kony's influence could reach them no matter where they went. Attempts to leave were rare and incredibly difficult, as members were closely monitored and kept dependent on the group for survival. Entire communities across Central Africa were affected, with families displaced and lives disrupted as the group expanded its reach across multiple countries. Despite international efforts to stop him, Kony remained elusive for years, becoming one of the most wanted figures in the world. What makes this case especially disturbing isn't just the scale of what happened, it's how a system was created that systematically reshaped young minds, turning vulnerable individuals into instruments of control within a structure designed to sustain itself. The Wet Charge Explosion. In January 2013, inside a foundry, workers were feeding scrap metal into a furnace as part of a routine process. What they didn't realize was that the metal had been exposed to moisture. When the scrap entered the extreme heat, trapped water inside instantly turned to steam, expanding up to 1,600 times its volume. The result was a violent explosion that sent debris flying across the facility. Footage shows metal fragments scattering through the air as workers scramble to avoid the blast. Miraculously, no serious injuries were reported, but the incident highlighted one of the most dangerous risks in metalwork: invisible moisture inside solid metal. Caught on border cameras. Near George West, Texas, a routine traffic stop quickly escalated when officers pulled over a 2005 box truck driven by Sylvia Patricia Santa Maria, who claimed she was transporting mattresses.
So what happened?
I was trying to back up, and then he said that I needed him. I really didn't.
You just don't remember? Houston? Or you headed where? Oh, you headed to Houston? Pero vienes de dónde? Alton. Oh, ¿qué estás haciendo allá? Two mattresses.
But inconsistencies in her story led officers to inspect the cargo more closely, revealing a hidden compartment behind approximately 30 stacked mattresses, where 25 migrants, including children, from countries like India, Honduras, and Guatemala, were tightly packed without proper ventilation. Many of them were dehydrated and struggling to breathe after being trapped for hours. As emergency responders worked to pull them out one by one, it became clear that the situation was only minutes away from turning fatal, exposing a dangerous smuggling method that relied on concealment at the cost of human life. The cult that orchestrated its own deaths. In October 1994, something strange happened across two countries at the same time. In Canada, 5 people were found dead inside a house. Just hours later, in Switzerland, dozens more were discovered in remote chalets in the Alps. In less than 24 hours, over 50 members of the Order of the Solar Temple had died in carefully staged scenes. Many of the buildings had been deliberately set on fire using identical devices, and among the victims were children, wealthy businessmen, and high-ranking professionals. At first, the group appeared to be an elite spiritual society. It was led by Joseph D. Mambro and Luc Jouret, who attracted educated and successful followers through private lectures and secret ceremonies. Members were told they were part of a chosen group connected to ancient traditions like the Knights Templar, and that they possessed knowledge hidden from the rest of the world. Inside the group, everything was built on secrecy and control. Initiation rituals took place in hidden rooms, with robes, symbols, and strict rules about what could be revealed. Some members were told they were reincarnations of historical or religious figures. Others witnessed what they believed were supernatural events, objects appearing out of nowhere, or spiritual masters revealing themselves. When in reality, these moments were later exposed as carefully staged illusions using lighting and hidden mechanisms. Over time, members became increasingly isolated. Their personal lives, relationships, and even daily routines were influenced by the group's leadership.
One day, I really had enough. He threatened me on the phone. The order was really beginning to crumble.
Doubts were discouraged, and those who questioned what they saw often found themselves pulled deeper in through new revelations or promises of higher status. Many had already invested years of their lives, along with large amounts of money, making it difficult to step away. Then, everything escalated. Letters were sent to the media claiming that members had left the Earth to reach a higher existence near the star Sirius. Authorities initially believed it was a coordinated act carried out by the group itself, but as investigations continued, inconsistencies began to appear. Some victims had been found in ways that raised questions about whether they had truly acted on their own. Families of the victims began to doubt the official explanation, pointing out that many had future plans and showed no signs of wanting to die. And it didn't end there. In the months that followed, more members were found dead in similar circumstances, arranged in ritual patterns, with the same sense of control and planning. By the time it was over, dozens more had died across multiple locations. To this day, the full truth remains unclear. Some believe it was a carefully orchestrated act driven by the leaders. Others believe not everyone had a choice, because in the end, this wasn't just a cult with extreme beliefs. It was a system so controlled, so secretive, that even now, no one can say for certain what really happened inside it. the oxygen-fed explosion. In a titanium smelting facility in Sichuan province, China, a dangerous condition developed when oxygen began leaking into the industrial environment. Oxygen itself isn't flammable, but it makes everything burn faster and more violently. In a setting already filled with heat and metal, the enriched atmosphere lowered ignition thresholds across the entire area. At some point, a small ignition triggered a sudden release of energy. The result was a rapid escalation, turning a routine operation into a dangerous industrial event within seconds. Investigators pointed to the oxygen leak as the key factor that allowed the situation to spiral out of control. No one could identify. In 1981, workers at a wastewater treatment plant in Richmond, Virginia, discovered the body of a young woman in a settling basin, and when police recovered her remains, they found very little to work with. She was believed to be in her early 20s, short and slender, with a tattoo reading DR on her arm. Forensic analysis revealed she had undergone a hysterectomy at a young age, something investigators noted was unusual and could point to past medical treatment or institutionalization. But her cause of death was clear, a gunshot wound to the head. And despite efforts to identify her through fingerprints, dental records, and a clay facial reconstruction distributed to the public, no one ever came forward to claim her or recognize her, leaving her officially unidentified and known only as the Richmond Jane Doe. At a time when law enforcement agencies largely worked in isolation without shared databases, the case quietly faded due to a lack of leads. Potential connections to other crimes or missing persons reports may have gone unnoticed, a gap that would later contribute to the FBI developing systems like the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, or VICAP for short, to better track and link violent crimes across jurisdictions. But for this victim, those advancements came too late, and her identity and her story remain unknown to this day. Final Fantasy House. In the early 2000s, what started as a normal online fandom around Final Fantasy VII slowly turned into something far more disturbing. At the center was a woman named Jennifer Cornett, who began contacting fans online and convincing them of a belief called soul bonding, the idea that they were the reincarnated versions of characters from the game. At first, it sounded harmless, almost like roleplay, but it didn't stay that way. Followers weren't allowed to choose who they were. Roles were assigned to them, slowly reshaping their identity until the line between reality and fiction started to disappear. Victims were invited to visit, and eventually move into what became known as the Final Fantasy House. At first, it felt like a place for fans to connect, but once inside, everything changed. Members were isolated, cut off from friends and family, and pressured to fully accept their assigned identities. One victim described being forced into exhausting mind regression sessions, lying on the floor, listening to game music for hours, trying to unlock memories of a life that never existed. Inside the house, control became constant. One member was forced to work while the others refused, making him the sole provider, while also demanding he do chores, give up money, and follow strict rules. Food became scarce, sleep was disrupted, and the environment turned chaotic, filled with screaming fights, manipulation, and emotional abuse. The apartment itself deteriorated into filth, while the people inside it became increasingly dependent on the group. And beneath it all, there was a darker pattern. The leader didn't just assign identities randomly, she chose them based on what she wanted from people. Relationships, control, even intimacy were shaped through this system, turning belief into a tool for manipulation. Over time, victims described feeling drained, confused, and unable to think clearly, classic signs of psychological control. Eventually, one member escaped and published a detailed warning online, exposing what had been happening inside the house. By the time people started paying attention, the group had already disappeared, changing names, moving locations, and even shifting into new fandoms to start the process again. The tire that exploded. Inside a tire shop, a mechanic knelt beside a large truck tire as it was being inflated. Everything seemed routine, until it went wrong. Without warning, the tire and rim assembly failed under pressure. The explosion was immediate and violent, launching the man into the air as the heavy tire flew across the workspace. High-pressure tires store enormous energy, and when they fail, that energy is released instantly. The entire incident happened in a split second, leaving no time to react. The movie so real, the FBI got involved. In the mid-1980s, a Japanese film called Guinea Pig started circulating through underground VHS trading networks. One copy eventually reached actor Charlie Sheen. After watching it, he was convinced it showed a real murder. The footage looked raw, no music, no credits. Just a man stalking a woman in Tokyo, abducting her, and filming everything that followed in extreme detail. Sheen reported it to authorities. The FBI took it seriously. They launched an investigation, confiscated tapes, and tracked down distributors to determine if the footage was real. For a time, they treated it as a possible snuff film. Eventually, they confirmed it was staged. But the fact it fooled investigators and triggered a full federal response shows how real it looked, and how thin the line can be between fiction and something far worse. The scaffold collapse. In an open industrial yard, 2 workers stood on top of a mobile scaffold while others on the ground decided to move it without asking them to climb down. As the structure rolled forward, one of the wheels hit a crack in the concrete. The entire scaffold shifted off balance. Within seconds, the tall, narrow frame tipped past its center of gravity and collapsed sideways. The workers on top were thrown down as tools and materials crashed around them. The entire incident happened because the scaffold was moved while still occupied. University of Cosmic Intelligence. A man named Rashad Jamal began posting videos in 2020, presenting himself as a prophet and building what he called the University of Cosmic Intelligence, a digital movement based on hidden knowledge, alternate realities, and the idea that certain people were spiritually superior beings. Followers paid monthly subscriptions to access his teachings, where he spoke about conspiracies involving shape-shifting elites, controlled weather systems, and higher dimensions. At first, it looked like just another fringe online community, but over time, the behavior of his followers began to change. In St. Louis, multiple adults connected to the group started isolating themselves, cutting off family, quitting jobs, and spending more time in online sessions. Neighbors reported strange rituals, people gathering at sunrise, chanting, digging in the yard, even running outside during storms. Then, in August 2023, 6 people linked to the group, including 2 toddlers, suddenly vanished. Their home was left exactly as it was. Food still in the microwave, laundry mid-cycle, nothing packed, no signs of struggle. Just gone. And it didn't stop there. In separate cases, individuals tied to the group were linked to violent incidents after becoming deeply involved in the teachings. One man, who had no serious criminal history, became obsessed with the content, selling personal belongings, isolating himself, and spending hours engaging with the material, before committing an act of extreme violence against his own family. In another case, 2 followers lured a couple to a remote location under false pretenses, leading to a deadly confrontation. What makes this case especially disturbing is how it spread. There was no central location, no physical compound, just videos, live streams, and online communities. Even after Rashad Jamal was arrested and sentenced to prison, his followers continued supporting him, sharing his teachings, and keeping the movement alive. The snapback zone. On the deck of a ship, crew members were working around a mooring line under heavy tension. One worker stood dangerously close to the connection point as adjustments were being made. Without warning, the line snapped free. The stored energy was released instantly, causing the thick rope to whip violently across the deck. It struck nearby structures and swept through the work area with extreme force. Equipment shifted, and one worker lost his footing in the chaos. In maritime work, this area is known as the snapback zone. And once a line breaks, there's no time to escape. The interrogation that broke Chris Watts. On August 15, 2018, in Frederick, Colorado, Chris Watts sat inside an interrogation room at the Frederick Police Department, calmly insisting he had no idea what happened to his pregnant wife Shanann and their 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste, who had been reported missing just hours earlier. But what immediately stood out to detectives and FBI agents was how composed he was, soft-spoken, cooperative, and almost emotionless, showing none of the panic you would expect from a man in his situation. As questioning continued, his story began to shift, first claiming he last saw them at home, then suggesting Shanann had taken the children and left, all while surveillance footage from a neighbor's camera showed Watts backing his truck into the driveway in the early morning hours. This was something he tried to downplay, and when investigators confronted him with the footage and inconsistencies in his timeline, his composure slowly started to crack. His body language changed, his answers became slower, and he was less confident. Yet, even after failing a polygraph test, he continued to deny everything, forcing investigators to change tactics by bringing his father, Ronnie Watts, into the room, hoping a more personal approach would break him, and that's when everything started to unravel. Chris partially confessed, but instead of telling the full truth, he claimed that Shanann had killed their daughters, and that he had then killed her in a rage, a version of events that briefly shifted the narrative and showed how far he was willing to go to deflect blame. Investigators faced the unsettling reality that they were dealing with someone who could appear completely normal while hiding something deeply violent. He finally confessed to killing his entire family, turning the recorded interrogation into one of the most disturbing examples of a seemingly normal father that turns out to be deadly. Sucked through a tiny hole. On November 5, 1983, aboard the Byford Dolphin oil rig in the Frigg gas field in the North Sea, 4 saturation divers, Roy Lucas, Edwin Coward, Truls Hellevik, and Bjørn Gaver Bergersen, had just returned from a deep dive at 295 feet. They had been working under 9 atmospheres of pressure and were safely back inside a pressurized chamber when, at around 4 a.m., dive tender William Crammond mistakenly released the clamp connecting the diving bell before the system was sealed. In an instant, the chamber explosively decompressed from 9 atmospheres to 1, creating a violent pressure difference that caused the air to rush out with immense force. It launched the multi-ton bell and fatally injured Crammond while severely injuring the other dive tender, Martin Saunders, who survived with collapsed lungs, a broken neck, and spinal fractures. But inside the chamber, the 4 divers had no chance as the gases dissolved in their blood expanded, instantly, causing their blood to effectively boil and killing them in less than a second. While Truls Hellevik, positioned closest to the hatch, was forced toward a partially open 24-inch opening by a pressure force estimated at over 25 tons, it resulted in one of the most extreme outcomes ever documented in an industrial accident. In total, 5 men died, and years later investigators concluded the disaster wasn't just human error, but a critical design flaw, as the system lacked a fail-safe interlocking mechanism that would have prevented the chamber from being opened while still pressurized. The press that closed in. Inside a factory, a worker was unloading material from a large industrial press machine. The machine had rotating components and narrow gaps between moving parts. While the worker was still inside the operating area, the press suddenly began a news cycle. The moving arm swept through the same tight space where the worker was positioned. In seconds, the open workspace turned into a closing trap as the machine's components moved together. The danger came from how quickly the machine transitioned from idle to active, leaving almost no time to react. The Boston Marathon bombers. On April 15, 2013, during the Boston Marathon bombing, 2 explosive devices detonated near the finish line, killing 3 people and injuring over 260 others. In the days that followed, the FBI analyzed thousands of hours of surveillance footage from storefronts, traffic cameras, and bystanders, eventually isolating images of 2 suspects, Tamerlan Tsarnaev and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, walking through the crowd carrying backpacks. And while each individual clip seemed insignificant, one key sequence showed one of them placing a bag at the exact location where one of the bombs later exploded, a detail captured in just a few frames that allowed investigators to reconstruct the attack and launch a nationwide manhunt. But what made this case deeply unsettling for the FBI was how ordinary everything looked before the explosions. Thousands of people moving through the same space, with the suspects blending in completely, showing no panic, no hesitation, nothing that set them apart in real time, forcing investigators to confront the reality that a mass casualty attack had been carried out in plain sight. The robot that didn't see him. Inside an automated factory, a worker stepped into an active robotic work cell, an area designed to operate without human presence. Focused on adjusting or cleaning a conveyor, he didn't realize the system was still active. Moments later, the robot began its programmed cycle. The mechanical arm swung into position and struck him from behind with full force, pinning him against the machinery. The system didn't stop immediately. It continued its motion, operating exactly as it was designed to, because it had no idea a person was there. The Freeway Phantom. Between 1971 and 1972, a serial killer known as the Freeway Phantom terrorized Washington, D.C., targeting young African-American girls between the ages of 10 and 18. The victims, Carol Spinks, Darlene Moore, Brenda Crockett, Relisha Rudd, Mary Singer, and Diane Williams, were abducted while running errands or heading home, often in broad daylight. Their bodies were later found along major roadways, abandoned near highways, which is how the killer earned his name. What made the case especially disturbing was the level of control the killer seemed to have. In one instance, 16-year-old Diane Williams was forced to write a note to her family while she was still alive. In it, she apologized for being out late and asked for forgiveness, words believed to have been dictated by her captor. The note was later found tucked in her clothing, turning it into one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the case. Despite the involvement of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and local police, the investigation was deeply flawed. Leads weren't properly followed up, communication between agencies was inconsistent, and some evidence was lost or never fully analyzed. At the time, the murders received limited media attention compared to other cases, which many believe contributed to the lack of urgency and resources. Over the years, several suspects were considered, including a man who allegedly confessed to multiple killings, but no one was ever charged. Decades later, the case remains unsolved. With key investigators now retired or deceased and critical evidence potentially gone, the Freeway Phantom continues to stand as one of the most chilling examples of how even large, multi-agency investigations can fail. The Powerline Arc. On a snowy roadside, a work truck was positioned beneath overhead power lines. As equipment on the truck was raised, it came dangerously close to the energized cables above. Then, without direct contact, a massive arc flash erupted. Electricity jumped through the air, creating a burst of plasma that spread across the ground. The area lit up instantly as heat and energy surged outward. High voltage lines don't need to be touched to be deadly. Getting close is enough. Silk Road. It started as a hidden website, one you couldn't access through a normal browser. Around 2011, a platform called Silk Road appeared on the dark web, accessible only through a network called Tor, which allowed users to stay completely anonymous. At first, it was presented as something almost idealistic, a free marketplace where people could buy and sell anything without government control. But very quickly, it became something else entirely. The site was created by a man named Ross Ulbricht, who operated under the alias Dread Pirate Roberts. His vision was to build a digital black market based on total anonymity. Payments were made using Bitcoin, making transactions difficult to trace. And because of that, the marketplace exploded. Within a short time, Silk Road was hosting thousands of listings, from illegal drugs to fake identities, hacking services, and weapons. What made Silk Road different wasn't just what was being sold, it was how structured it was. It operated like a real business. Sellers had ratings, buyers left reviews, there were rules, moderators, and even customer support. It created a strange sense of trust in a completely illegal environment. People who had never met, never spoken, and never knew each other's identities were doing business daily. because the system made it feel safe. But behind that structure, things were escalating. As the platform grew, so did the risks. Authorities across multiple countries began investigating, trying to figure out who was running the site. Meanwhile, Ulbricht was becoming more deeply involved, allegedly ordering actions to protect the platform, including attempts to silence individuals he believed were threats. What started as a marketplace was turning into a cult-like setup. In October 2013, the operation finally collapsed. The FBI tracked Ulbricht to a public library in San Francisco, where he was arrested while logged into Silk Road as its administrator. They seized his laptop on the spot, capturing all the evidence they needed. The site was shut down, and Ulbricht was later sentenced to life in prison without parole. But even after Silk Road was taken down, copies of the marketplace began appearing almost immediately. New versions, new names, same system, proving that the idea itself couldn't be easily stopped. The door that fell from above. Inside a clinic lobby, a visitor entered through a large frameless glass door. As the door closed behind her, something went wrong with the overhead hinge. Without warning, the entire sheet of tempered glass detached. The massive panel dropped straight down and shattered on impact, exploding into fragments across the floor. A nearby employee narrowly avoided the main impact. The failure was traced back to worn or improperly installed hardware, something invisible until the moment it gave way. Abscam. In the late 1970s, the FBI launched a covert sting operation known as Abscam, short for Arab Scam. Agents posed as representatives of a fictional wealthy Arab sheikh, offering large cash bribes in exchange for political favors such as immigration help, business deals, and government contracts. Meetings were staged in hotel suites wired with hidden cameras and microphones, allowing investigators to secretly record every interaction. Between 1978 and 1980, multiple U.S. politicians were caught on tape accepting money or discussing illegal deals. Among them were Harrison A. Williams and Michael Myers. One of the most infamous moments showed Myers accepting $50,000 in cash and saying, "Money talks," while agreeing to use his position to assist the fake investors. Other officials were recorded negotiating bribes, asking for upfront payments, or seeking ways to hide the transactions. The operation ultimately led to the conviction of one U.S. senator, 6 members of Congress, and several additional public officials. However, Abscam was controversial. Some argued that the FBI had gone too far and essentially lured politicians into committing crimes they might not have otherwise attempted, a legal concept known as entrapment. Courts ultimately rejected most of these arguments, and the convictions were upheld. The elevator shaft fall. On June 19, 2025, in Jiangsu Province, China, an elderly woman lost control of her tricycle near a building entrance. As she collided with an elevator door, the door suddenly gave way. The impact caused both the woman and the tricycle to fall directly into the open shaft below. Emergency services were called immediately, and she was rescued and transported to the hospital with multiple fractures. The incident showed how quickly a structural failure can turn an ordinary moment into a serious accident. If you thought these cases were disturbing, the stories in the next videos go even deeper into footage that was never meant to be seen. Click one of the videos on your screen now. You don't want to miss what happens next.